When looking at the issue of crime in youth, youth are involved in crime a lot more than adults. That reason is when you're younger, you have more time on your hand and you're less mature, less experienced, you have less wisdom, and therefore with this more time on your hand, you have more time to commit crime. You also have less responsibilities. You don't have a wife usually, you don't have a husband, you don't have a job, you don't have anything that's tying you down, preventing you from committing crime. So we see this younger age group being involved in a lot more crime than adults are. And then you can see a disparity in race when it comes to youth crime. African Americans are far more likely to be victimized than whites, victimized by crime. They're 6 to 7 times more likely to be a victim of crime than whites. And then in addition, they are also the highest rate of homicide for black youth. So African American youths have a lot stacked against them as far as being victims to crime. In addition, they are also arrested far more than any other race. And then in addition to that, youth interact with the police a lot more than adults. A big reason for this is they're not at jobs, they're not at like that, so they're out at parks and stuff like that, so they have a lot more interaction with police. They're in the public, and therefore they have more interaction with the police. In addition, black youth are locked up a lot more than whites. White youth usually receive probation, while black youth usually have to spend time in prison or jail. And then, as we've seen kind of throughout the course, the justice system does not usually favor people of color, minorities. They usually receive harsher sentence, worse treatment than whites. This is also the case in the juvenile justice system, where they are untreated unfairly, just like in the regular criminal justice system. When we look at why minority youths are arrested more while they're victimized more, researchers think it has a lot to do with where they come from. Minority youths live in poverty a lot more than whites, so therefore they come from communities that lack closeness. They come from single-parent homes. They're also likely to spend more time away from home, and therefore they have more time to get in trouble. They have less stable living conditions. So all this comes out to home lives that are not as good as white youths, and therefore they're more likely to get in trouble, and that getting in trouble can lead to either them getting arrested or them getting hurt, robbed, etc. So when looking at ways to deal with this issue, a group I found that I thought was very interesting was the National Police Athletics/Activities League. The acronym is PAL. One of the reasons I picked this organization is I like sports and I want to be a police officer, so I thought it was a cool way to combine the two. What the mission the stated mission is to establish and provide civic, athletic, recreational, educational opportunities and resources to PAL chapters. At each chapter across the nation, law enforcement personnel get to work with youth in the classroom and on the field in order to build respect in the youth for law. This respect for law and law enforcement benefit the youth, law enforcement, and the community. What is unique about this youth program is that it provides kids with a daily positive interaction with law enforcement. What's super cool about this program is many of these youth coming from broken homes, communities that aren't close, usually have a negative interaction with law enforcement. So when they're having these basketball games, football games like that, they're starting to build positive interaction with police officers. This will grow with them as they become adults, and they can go back into their community with this positive interaction with law enforcement. This will lead to a greater respect to law enforcement, which will lead to less negative interactions with police officers. They will trust the police more. They can tell the police what's going on in their community. The police will be able to have this interaction and be able to provide better resources to these communities because they're able to talk and have positive interactions with these communities. How the organization operates, PAL is kind of the large, big organization, and what it does is it provides money to small chapters. The chapters are kind of what do the groundwork. Police departments that choose to can have the organization. Phoenix Police has one. Usually it's bigger law enforcement agencies that have kind of the resources to handle such programs. They will put on their own programs using their own facilities, and that will be kind of the local that's how the local groups operate. They get their funding from the large organization, and they will do most of the own work, and so therefore they kind of fit the programs at their needs. The positives of this: it provides youth with something to do to stay out of trouble. It allows the public to have interactions with the police in a positive setting. They're not getting arrested, they're not getting tickets, they're just having a basketball game or getting taught mentorship, things like that. It builds healthy relationships with the police, and then youth who might not have interactions with school, after-school clubs, Boy Scouts, maybe things that they can't afford, have this free interaction with other youth and with police officers that is in a positive setting. Some of the negatives of the program is it drains department resources and officers that might be needed elsewhere. They might need it on patrol. Officers might not want to do it. It's all volunteer, so officers might want to spend their time off doing something else, and so therefore they might not have a good group of officers there if they don't want to be there. And it needs to work with the community. The police can't do it just by themselves. Police usually do not have their own basketball courts, things like that. And if they don't, they need to work with the community to find these things, and so therefore they have to have the community on board, which might not always be the case for some agencies. And it's because it's kind of a large organization working with local chapters, it's not the same quality spread across the board. And so when looking at kind of some reform efforts that could be made in such areas, one of them I found was a thing called child adversity. The research study is called Child Adversity Among Court-Involved Youth, Heterogeneous Needs for Prevention and Treatment. And what this kind of did was, it was a research study that looked at how government, local and federal, can implement programs to better identify problems within youth. And so the quote I picked for it was, adverse childhood experiences, these are factors, broken homes, single parents, things like that, sexual abuse. Adverse childhood experience increased risks of rearrest with higher cumulative exposure, leading to recidivism rates. The findings of these studies have just suggested a critical need for trauma-informed treatment services for juvenile justice involved youth specific to their complex trauma histories. And so what basically this says in summary is that we need to be better at identifying these traumas that youth have faced, and when they identify these traumas, we can better create treatment for it. We'll have a better plan to deal with these things. We're not just trying a generic plan that can maybe fix all. We're actually identifying what needs to be fixed. And then the other reform I found was from a research article titled After School Programs for Delinquency Prevention, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis. And so this is reviewing programs like PAL to see how effective are. And the data found that the results of meta-analysis suggest that after-school programs have a rather small and non-significant effect on delinquency. So it basically states here that it only contributes to a 3% reduction in delinquency. So a lot of money has been poured into these after-school programs. And what they found through data is that they're not necessarily helpful. They're still very important. They provide things like childcare after school. It provides still social interactions for children who might need it, but they're not necessarily reducing delinquency, which is kind of what they came from. So from these two articles, I think the best reform method would be using these adverse childhood experiences, analyzing these, see what the majority of youth are struggling with, and then shaping programs to deal with these issues. Not just after-school programs that, like PAL, that are playing basketball, things like that. They look good and they do solve some problems. However, they're not targeting the issue as much. So I got all my information to get kind of the issues that youth are dealing with. I used a lot of the textbook. I used some of my past information from my previous criminal justice classes. To look up PAL, I used the actual website for PAL. I watched a few videos online, kind of getting a first-hand look into how these programs work. And then for the research articles, I looked on some peer-reviewed journals. I felt like it was important to see to pinpoint the problems. That way we could have better reform efforts. So that's why I chose the research thing that looked at adverse childhood experiences, and then I wanted to see how effective after-school programs actually were, and so that's why I used the research that looked at these programs using data to better establish a system that actually deals with the issue, not necessarily just looks good, and therefore we could, using these two, we could establish better programs.